Am I blocking everything? Let me move up. You can see they're actually drilling down into Christianity a little bit. You know, they got this group called Captive Christians, and there's a 9-point criteria that Barna uses for defining some of these groups. You know what those that I can't be over here to advance the slides.
Where do we fit the
There we
skeptics?
go. Perfect.
Skeptics?
Yeah, we're skeptics. Oh, it's too soon. Okay. So, others don't take religion all that seriously, even the religion that they themselves believe in, quote unquote. And I would say that many, maybe even the vast majority of those who say that they're Christian, and I think all of you probably agree with this, a lot of them only pretend to take their God, their Jesus, and all their dogmas and doctrines seriously. So whatever else you mean by the word, whatever the idea may mean, you have to admit it's very interesting.
That was 10 years ago.
Yeah. I guess I did a couple slides on
Stuff
it.
changes.
This is a slide I meant to put up there. I mean, you have to admit religion is terribly interesting. And, oh no, that's not right. You know what? I printed my remarks on both sides of the paper is what happened. Okay, that's where it happened. Anyways, I would say that most Christians take their doctrines and dogmas about as seriously as pastafarians take the flying spaghetti monster. True or false? Yeah. Okay. And currently, the fundamentalist Bible worshippers take the Satanic Temple a lot more seriously than does the Satanic Temple itself. And of course, that's rather the point, isn't it? But now don't get the Satanic Temple confused with the Temple of Satan, which has an article on its website. That's this Moravian thing. They have an article on their website called The Heresy of Modern Satanism. And in that article, they rant and rave and say that the bottom line is that an ideology calling itself Satanism that doesn't believe in Satan, the Antichrist, hell, or demons, doesn't practice real black magic, embraces the rationalism and secularism of the Enlightenment cult, and doesn't have an agenda beyond sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Of course, they're talking about the Temple of Satan. Is for us not Satanism at all. Did they miss the part where Satan and hell and all that are the inventions of Christianity? Do they not see that their Satanism is a parody of what was already a bad joke? Or are they just putting us on too? So whatever else you suppose religion is, whatever you mean by the word, whatever the idea of it may be to anyone or what it means to you, any sane person, and I think that includes everybody here, has to admit that religion is fascinating, a fascinating thing. How could any thinking person not agree with that? But inasmuch as religion is just one's Weltanschauung, what a great German word, one's entire sense of the world of human experience and the puzzle of the human condition, of what it means to be human generally, and what it is like, what it feels like, what it means to be the individual people we are, something that no one else has or can have any access to, I think. Indeed, I'm certain that we freethinkers have the best of it. We're not burdened with doctrines and dogmas, answers to the great questions of existence that cannot be questioned. We're free to see things as we see them, although that often means struggling with questions that may seem to have no answers, or to which there may be only partial or temporary, or for the moment and for the context, answers. But that's wonderful too, because it gives us many opportunities to go, oh, wow, now I get it, Eureka. We can believe what we want, knowing that belief is often a kind of trap, one that keeps us from believing what we want, what we should want to believe, because beliefs get in the way of thinking. And thought is for us the essential and indispensable vehicle of discovery. Anyone who thinks that everything has already been found, that there are no new frontiers to be explored and then gone beyond, is someone who does not appreciate the life of the mind and especially its qualia, the features of the human experience that are intrinsically personal, private, subjective, and in that sense, ineffable. A church built on a religion such as this is worth having, worth belonging to, worth participating in, and worth sustaining and supporting. These things are too important to be left to the traditional religions, and too important to confine to academic philosophy or even to the worlds of art and humanities. And as I always say, more later, future services to come. But we won't review other things, like we do on this day in history as we have, because it's amazing how come some things, everything relates to everything else and how they often come together to talk about what we talk about. But it is worth thinking that October 12th is Freethought Day. This commemorates something of a watershed in legal history, concern over and ultimately the discounting and exclusion of spectral evidence in courts of law that was going on during the Salem witch trials. An impressive example of people choosing to behave reasonably despite its inconsistency with their superstitions, right? Because their own book told them there are witches and they had to kill them and so forth, but they had to put a stop to the hysteria. So they did the only thing they could and acted reasonably, because there wasn't any other alternative. So this is our creed, what we aspire to. If you agree, great. If you don't agree, I'd like to hear about why. Maybe we should change it. It was a lot longer at one time. I don't know that we can make it any shorter than this. If there's anything you disagree with, let's talk about it. We don't demand that you have some kind of statement of faith. What we do require, what every single person ought to require of themselves, is enough sanity to realize that beliefs, which is really only where thinking leaves off, ought to be grounded in facts and reason. So the most effort goes into our monthly service. Each is different, and we've had many very good ones. And I hope that today's will be one. In fact, I'm certain that it's going to be with Randy Horning talking to us. We once wondered whether we would run out of things to talk about. I don't think there's any danger of that. We're coming up on our past 25 years. We're coming up on 25 years this coming February. So please let us know how we're doing, how we might do it better. Even better, help us do it better. Several of our members have given wonderful presentations on a variety of subjects. John Gautier, our videographer, Don Krause. Don is here, who's given presentations in the past. Once or twice as Santa, I believe. Yeah. We had a wonderful moment of science. So you don't have to do the whole service, you just do a segment. We have a moment of science that we don't do every time. We're doing it without this time, so we have more time for Randy. But John did one of the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. Imagine starting out talking about how to make light bulbs more efficient and winding up with, this is why the atoms have the structure they do. It was an amazing time. So anything you come across that you think may appeal to your fellow freethinkers is worth considering. And we have other things going on as well. How did that happen? Holding the paper down.
God did it.
God did it. All right. So we have game night every Friday at the IHOP at I-35 and the Northwest Highway, every Friday. Did you win this last Friday, Kit? One of the two games, okay. So, and Don, were you at? No, you weren't back yet.
Yeah, I did. I was there.
Mark was at. Well, you have to try to beat Mark. He's the one to beat.
Still.
So they play all these games and stuff. The back of the bulletin's got this information. And then on non-first Sundays of the month, we have Freethought Salon at the Edison Suites on Bass Pro Drive, just a little ways northwest of here. The food, they have if you stay there, you get a free breakfast. If you don't stay there, you can still get the breakfast. You have to pay for it, although a couple of times our members have gone to pay and they got forget about it. But the food goes away at 10:30. But you can bring your own food. We have this large indoor atrium. We meet towards the back. And then, of course, we can always do more besides what we're already doing. Check page 2 of the bulletin. So if you have an idea for a one-off, just something to do one time, movie, or we've had a book club on and off over the years, give it some thought. It could be just, like I say, a one-time event. Put your free thinking into action and enjoy the rewards of helping in some way to push the world in a better direction. And we always need volunteers to assist, especially Kit. She doesn't have any little ones today, but she's been watching the child care Sunday service. And Berlin moved away to Georgia. How many remember Berlin? Heard from him, he's doing well. Ethel, by the way, how many know Ethel? She's in the hospital, in the ICU. Probably not going to live a lot longer. She had went through a terrible ordeal with a bone marrow transplant that didn't work. So we're all trying to go and stop by and see her from time to time. She really, really appreciates seeing people that she knows. So anyways, we have volunteers. That's a great thing. And we appreciate John Hendricks in the back there who brought in all this equipment. Edwin Peglow, who showed up early to help us set up That's pretty important. And Aaron Delton, who's not here again, I don't know, we might have to fire him. You know, we do the volunteers that don't show up often enough. Anyway, there's always lots to do, but it's very doable, very rewarding, if not in dollars. And you are this church, and I encourage you to think of how you can make use of it to do good things. There's not really a whole lot of decision making that doesn't happen at the level of people who are actually doing the work. So if you think, like most of us, that there's something seriously wrong with traditional religions that help us do religion right. And with that, we are going to toggle over to Randy Honig, who is, if you got the email, is a geography teacher in the Irving Independent School District. And up until 2015 was CEO and a high monthly month in the Boy Scouts of America here locally, or was it nationally?
It was local.
All right, so then they found out he's an atheist. That must be an interesting story. If we don't hear it as part of your talk, perhaps another time. Yeah.
Well, actually, this organization had a little bit to do with that. In summer 2015, I found. Let me start out. When I began my career in the Boy Scouts in 1989, I was a very staunch Catholic, and it was a great organization for me at the time. I had a Catholic wife, and we had a Catholic baby, and we were going to do the whole Catholic thing. But what's fascinating about working for the Boy Scouts is the Boy Scouts work with so many different churches, and I found myself going out and having to have relationships with all these different pastors, different churches. First day on the job, they handed me a box of cassettes. And in one of the cassettes, or every cassette said how to talk to a Baptist minister, how to talk to a Jewish rabbi, you know, and it told you all the lingo, and it was it really made you, try to make you sound like you belong to their denomination. When we talk to them, so that you'd have credibility, so they'd be willing to start a Boy Scout troop or a pack or whatever in the organization. And I was good at it. I found out I could go around and I could talk to these folks and convince them that, boy, I was right on their side. And over the course of my 27-year career, I got to looking at all these places, and I realized there just isn't a whole lot of difference between any of them. And the one that I belonged to was kind of the crappiest. And they were the hardest to get along with, hardest to work with. You know, Presbyterians and Methodists were so much easier to deal with than the Catholics. So that kind of started the ball rolling in my head. I probably stopped going to church 15 years ago. You know, and as many atheists do, it was a gradual process, but I couldn't fully complete the process because it is a requirement in the Boy Scouts of America that its professionals and all members believe in God. And so I couldn't just come out and say that I was an atheist. I spent the bulk of my career in Houston, and because Houston was so big, it was easy to be anonymous. And then I got offered a job in Wichita Falls to be the top guy of their local council. And took it. It was a great opportunity. And I realized that Wichita Falls ain't Houston. And it was a very common thing for me to come to work on Monday morning and have people say, "I didn't see you in church yesterday." So suddenly my anonymity was questioned. And I wasn't fully calling myself.
Almost have to rest it.
Got it. I wasn't fully calling myself an atheist at the time, but I absolutely was no longer Catholic, and I was no longer Christian. And I didn't know what it was. I'm not going to get too much into my personal story, but at the same time I was going through a divorce. I had a wife in Houston who did want to move with me, and turned out she was correct. And I'm so fortunate that I have this wonderful atheist lady and my wife now. It makes it all worthwhile. And in June of 2015, I found myself with a week off. I came down to this area, and I tried to find, there's got to be some sort of atheist group here. And I found you guys. And you don't remember me because I sat in the back and practically said nothing, but I just wanted to, it was just such a nice feeling to hear other people who had the same views that I did that I wasn't able to ever share. And I've come back a couple of times. And 6 months later, I quit the organization. They never truly found out I was an atheist, but they knew I wasn't one of them. And they made it very uncomfortable for me. And so I got out.
Were you full-time with the Boy Scouts?
I was. It was my career.
When was that? Halfway through or all the way through?
I'm sorry.
When were you full-time?
From 1989 till 2015.
Oh, you were a full-time
I
job.
was a full-time employee with the Boy Scouts of America. Those of you who are familiar with it, you know, district executives and council executives, and I heard you say you were an Eagle Scout before. So yeah, there's a profession. There's about 6,000 people nationwide employed by the Boy Scouts of America. And shrinking because the organization is shrinking. And we're going to talk about that a little bit here. But as you saw in your bulletin,
You had contacted me at one time then about sexual abuse going on in the Boy Scouts. Is that true?
I think so.
Is that you? Yeah.
Might have been, yeah. We're going to talk a bit about that too. But as you mentioned in the bulletin, Scouting was founded by Robert Bacon Powell, and his quote, "No man is much good unless he believes in God and obeys his law, so every scout should have a religion." In a way, he was a little bit ahead of his time because he also didn't care what that religion was. Early on, it was non-sectarian. I'm going to talk about that word here in a little bit, but they were welcoming of people of many faiths at once, which in 1907, you got a little impressed by that. But he did believe in the need for religion. But fast forward 110 years, and you'll see they haven't advanced a whole lot. This is a statement from June 13, 2018. Now therefore be it resolved that the National Executive Board of the Boy Scouts of America hereby reaffirms its unequivocal commitment to the Declaration of Religious Principle as a fundamental component of the mission of the Boy Scouts of America. So the Declaration of Religious Principle is something you agree to whenever you sign up to be a scout. Who in this room was a member of Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts? Some Girl Scouts here too. Okay, good. The Girl Scouts had a similar agreement, but they did away with it in 1992. They were a bit ahead of the game. But your parents, if they signed you up to be a scout, or if you signed up to be a leader, you agreed to this. Next one. This is the picture of me when I was a professional. This is someone right when that job up in Wichita Falls, congressman that would come visit the troops there whenever we needed votes. The picture up top is me with a bunch of Scottish scouts when they came and visited. And that picture on the right is from a speech I was giving in Houston. It's got a logo in the back. Okay. So these are the applications for Boy Scouts of America. The youth, the parent fills out the vote, but the youth fill out the one on the left, and adults fill out the one on the right. If you go to the next page, you'll see where it is you are agreeing to the Declaration of Religious Principle. There's 2 pages of information on the application that talks about program policies, how to be a volunteer, how to donate, how the charter organization concepts work, and there's one kind of paragraph right here that is what you're agreeing to. Now, when I was a professional and I was trying to get people signed up, I really wasn't worried whether or not they read this. In fact, sometimes I would just tear those pages off and hand them the pages they had to fill out. Not that I was trying to hide it, but I wanted them to fill it out because that's all I really cared about. And I wanted them to become members because I was evaluated on my ability to get people to join. And so my career advanced when I got more people to be part of the organization. If you could flip to the next page, we're going to look at the whole. So this is what the Boy Scouts have to say about religion. I've got broken down into some sections here. So the clause 1, the Boy Scouts of America maintain that no member can grow into the best kind of citizen without recognizing an obligation to God. On the first part of the Scout Oath, the member declares, "On my honor, I will do my best to do my duty to God and my country and to obey the Scout law." Now, it's already a little bit of a flaw in there because it's saying God and not gods, and if we're recognizing Hindu Scouts, then they're going to recognize more than one God, but that's a small thing. That's been there since since I was around, probably much longer than that. The second section here, if you advance again, this they just added since I left. The recognition of God as the ruling and leading power in the universe and the grateful acknowledgement of his favors and blessings are necessary to the best type of citizens and our wholesome precepts in the education of the growing members. I can only theorize what this is about, but in this era where the Boy Scouts have now allowed gay leaders, gay youth, trans, and now girls, they had to hold their base together somehow. And I think they put this in here for that purpose, to show that we are strong. And this whole God is the ruling leader, power of the universe screams evangelical, even though they claim to be non-sectarian. Go to the next one. No matter what the religious faith of the member may be, the fundamental need for good citizenship should be kept before them. The Boy Scouts of America therefore recognizes the religious element of the training and the training of the member, but is absolutely non-sectarian, that's that word, in its attitude towards that religious training. What that's saying is the Boy Scouts itself is not going to train you and teach you religion. They're going to leave that to the local troops, which are all chartered to most likely a church. Not required, sometimes Eagles clubs and Veterans of Foreign Wars were charter organizations, but by and large, they were chartered by churches, and they let that responsibility to the church. If you were in a Mormon troop, you got taught the Mormon faith. If you were in a Baptist troop, you got taught the Baptist faith. You weren't required to be of those faiths. Every once in a while, I would have to deal with a church. We'd get a new pastor and say, why are there kids in here that aren't Baptist? It's the Baptist church. And he had the right to kick them out. And there were times we would have to tell people, you gotta go find another troop. I'd have to help them leave because that person wanted only Baptists in his troop. And that didn't happen very often. Most of them just like having kids around. And we would sell it to these churches as a proselytizing opportunity. Because even if they're not a member of your church, if they come to your church every week, you can kind of see that religion in them. And most of them like that idea. All right, the last thing here, its policy is that the home and the organization or group with which the member is connected shall give definitive attention to religious life. Again, that's just reiterating their point that we're not giving them religion. The Boy Scout program that they're putting on doesn't have any religion in it. It shocks some people. But it is, the Boy Scout program is all about tying knots and lighting fires and all those boring things you thought they were about. That's really what they're about. This is the stuff that they love. Sort of wilderness survival and those kinds of things. Thank you. Please. One more. Okay. So the way they handle religion is there's an organization called PRAY. I can't remember what PRAY stands for, but they create all these awards that the boys can earn. They don't have to earn any of them. You can get all the way to Eagle Scout and never earn a religious award. It's not required. But it is an opportunity, and a lot of them, because the Boy Scouts are all about wearing badges on the outside and showing off what you've done, which is a good model for education. They would put these in here, and this is kind of a list of the different churches, the Baha'i, Buddhists, some of those that can be pronounced Hindu, Islam. The Boy Scouts go way out of their way to make sure every possible faith is there, and it has an opportunity to be a part of their organization, and that goes back to their desire to constantly grow and get bigger. And the last one on here is Unitarian Universalists. Actually, this is close. But the Unitarian Universalists, they've had an interesting relationship with the Boy Scouts because those of you who are familiar with them, they allow atheists to be members of their group. And they were out of the organization. They didn't have a relationship with the Boy Scouts for a number of years, and just recently, about 2 years ago, they have reaffirmed their relationship with the Boy Scouts. And many people have misconstrued that to believe, so now atheists can join if you're long as you're a member of a UU church. Go to the next one. But the Boy Scouts covered that. So in this statement, humanists, agnostics, and atheists are a cherished part of the UUA. They are ministers, our Sunday school teachers, our parishioners, leaders with the UUA, the wider movement, the UUA. Even while moving with gratitude into their new relationship with the Boy Scouts of America, recognizes that the BSA's requirement for scouts and leaders to affirm a religious belief is at odds with our non-creedal faith tradition. The UUA will continue to work with the BSA towards greater inclusion. So you can get it, you still have to believe in God to be a member of the Boy Scouts of America, even if you're in the UUA. Okay, on the next. All right, so I kind of want to get you into the mindset of what motivates the Boy Scouts of America on a national scale. This is the Boy Scout membership records from 1972 to 2016. I looked up the 2017 numbers, and that downward trend continues, and they haven't released their 2018 year-end figures yet, so they're not available. But you'll notice here that there is a very steep decline, a bit of a rise, and then yet another decline after that. This is the driving force behind the Boy Scouts. They will do anything to get this to work. This is what they do. You can make $1 million tomorrow if you can tell them how to make that happen. And they've tried everything. I can't even list all the initiatives and programs that were released that various people thought were going to turn this trend around. What started this trend in 1972 was when the national office first decided to maintain all the records national and not allow the local councils to maintain their own records. Up until then, all you would do is the professional scout over a particular council. There's 300 councils in the nation, which is divided into territories. We are part of the Longhorn Council here, which is most of the Fort Worth area. To be a part of that, all you had to do was say, they would say, okay, it's $4 a scout. And they would send a check for $4,000, that means you had 1,000 scouts. And that was the only proof there was. So, you know, if your career is based on it, somehow they would find the money and they could sign these people up. Somehow in the 70s, they decided, you know, we need to have better control of this. We need to know who these scouts are. We need to have all these names and records. And so they required councils to send in rosters of who was in these troops. And that's what started this. So what we're really saying is this was phantom anyway. That was never as real as the numbers were not what they looked like, and there was this dramatic drop. Slide. So yeah, the national maintained records, go to the next one. 74 to 80 is called the Boy Power era. While the slide was going on, everyone in the program was in a panic, trying to figure out what had happened in the organization, because up until 1972, they had growth every single year. Name any company who can make that claim. You can tell something was wrong. They had that kind of success year after year after year. And so they put in these initiatives to try to get boys to recruit other boys into the organization. They put heavy pressure on the professional scouts in order to get them to recruit more kids, to get leaders. There was just a heavy effort on this, and it was a total disaster. Many people were caught cheating on the numbers and got fired over it, and it was not a good time for the organization. And the national director back then, a guy named Tar, pretty much got kicked out by the national board. Even next. So 1978 was when the gay ban was implemented. A lot of people think that the gay ban was always there, and it was not. There was certainly an unofficial gay ban. Homosexuality was something that was not well received. And in 1978, they decided to put in a ban because the year previous, there was a successful lawsuit against the Boy Scouts of America. There have been many cases, we know cases that go all the way back to the 1920s, but no one had ever successfully sued the Boy Scouts. But in 1977, there was a child prostitution ring in New Orleans that is just astoundingly bad. It was so deep. Politicians were involved. sending kids to other states was involved. And it all centered on Troop 137 in New Orleans. And the head of the Child Sexual Abuse Investigation Unit in New Orleans was involved. That's how bad this thing was. But it had to be that bad for the Boy Scouts to lose because they were considered an organization beyond reproach. And back in 1970s, the thought was, well, yeah, we caught the guy, he's the one who's at fault, not the organization. And the jury said, no, we're going to hold the Boy Scouts accountable for this. And they panicked. And using 1978 Boy Scout logic, they said, it's the homosexuals' fault. And so they put in this ban on homosexuals. The Scout executive at the time sent a letter out to every council saying, if you suspect someone is a homosexual, you need to let us know. And they ran into a funny little time frame there where they were getting all kinds of complaints about people being gay. Now, the Boy Scouts is political like churches and any other organizations are, and people didn't like each other, were turning each other in for being gay. And it was, so they really got beat up over this, and it was a horrible thing, but at the same time, they made some new friends. I'm going to take a guess at who started liking the Boy Scouts all of a sudden? The evangelicals. Suddenly the evangelicals, who had never been fans of the Boy Scouts, I never once started a Boy Scout troop at an evangelical church. They don't care about you being a good citizen, they want to win your soul. But the evangelicals suddenly liked the Boy Scouts and became a source of revenue. Suddenly they realized, hey, because we had the same idea towards homosexuals that they had, very different reasons why, but this unholy alliance suddenly sprung up. And before that, the Boy Scouts had a fantastic reputation of staying politically in the middle. At one time, the biggest supporters of the Boy Scouts of America financially was the AFL-CIO and the NRA. And you can get those two sides liking you, you're doing something right. They walk that tightrope really well. Now suddenly they're in bed with the evangelical churches of America. Even next. So in 1982, at the bottom of this slide, they decided to change things by allowing first graders to join. Those are called Tiger Cubs. And that started a little bit of a bump. I put that in here just so you can see that's why there was an elevation in that. Before that, they were somehow, for some reason, very adamant that Boy Scouts had to start in the second grade. And they realized they were losing a lot of kids because by the time you get to the second grade, they've already signed up for a bunch of other organizations. So they started the Tiger Cub program in 1982, and things started to turn up. 1984 to 1993, the Boy Scouts started a program called the Five Unacceptables. It's actually the thing I'm most proud of being a part of when I was in the organization. They came together and said, what can we do? We have millions of little kids. What can we do to help the culture, help society? They're trying to turn their image around a little bit here. And so they identified 5 things. One of them was drug abuse, underemployment. And the biggest one that they addressed was hunger. And they launched a program where they would send the scouts out and collect food and bring it to the food banks. It was a fantastic program. So of course they canceled it. Grocery stores would print scouting for food on their bags, and they would do it on the same day nationwide. It was really a good thing that they were doing there, and I never heard why, but for some reason they decided they weren't going to do it anymore. And some local councils kept it going, but it's pretty much died out everywhere else. But it was a good thing that they did. They also printed a lot of literature that went into the schools that talked about drug abuse, and steroid use was starting to become a big deal then, so that was there. And of course we used it as recruitment tools. It gave me a reason to go to the schools because I could give them all this free stuff to give to the kids. So they had a bit of a resurgence in the 80s, and this is also the era of Reagan, so we had a popular bumper sticker that we would sell that said, "Scouting is returning to the values." No. America is returning to the values Scouting never left. And we tried to trying to catch on that whole wave of nationalism that was going on at that time. Next. So in 1999, the Dale decision happened. The Dale decision, Dale was a guy who was, went to a scouting program, got his Eagle, had no one of, no real controversies or anything, but after he went off to college, he started or joined, I forget exactly, an LGBT group. And this is 99 before they were even called that. And people in his hometown found out about it. And the Boy Scouts took his Eagle Scout away from him because he was gay. Dale ran this through the court systems and got it all the way to the Supreme Court. In 1999, I was camp director in San Marcos, Texas, and we were happened to be in the middle of Mormon Week. And I had 400 Mormons out at my camp, and we found out the decision was going to come down that Thursday. And the Mormons were ordered to pack all their stuff and be ready to leave at a moment's notice. They all settled their bill with me, make sure they didn't owe us anything, so that if the decision came down that the Boy Scouts had to allow homosexuals, they would pack up and move out and leave. Which, terrified me, that's my job, right? And the decision went the other way. The decision came down 5-4 that the Boy Scouts had the right as a private organization to set their own standards of membership. And in a way, I still agree with that decision because the idea was, do you really want the government to come in and approve who can be in your organization and who can't be? Now that we see who's running our government now, I don't think I want that either. But we had a big celebration that night. The Boy Scouts, got to be, we're free, we're allowed to do what we want. But it's significant because look what the membership did after that. It brought the homosexual issue in the Boy Scouts to national attention, and suddenly people started realizing this organization isn't exactly friendly to homosexuals, and the decline, a very predictable, steady decline started. Can you go to the next one? So in year 2000 was when the first batch of millennials started becoming adults. And this is, they started turning 18 around the year 2000. And this is significant, and I'm going to show you some data on that a little bit here, but the millennials had very different values than the generations before them. And this ban on homosexuality started to really haunt the Boy Scouts. Certain denominations started dropping, the more liberal denominations started saying that they wouldn't associate with the Boy Scouts anymore. It was just a slow drip of people saying they wouldn't be a part of us. We were losing donors. Levi Jeans dropped the Boy Scouts. They were funding, they were giving good money to the Boy Scouts because boys buy Levi Jeans, right? It'd be a natural. But you remember 501 jeans? 501 jeans were a huge hit in the homosexual world. Button-fly jeans, and suddenly they had a big voice, and Levi listened to them. And Levi dropped the Boy Scout, the funding of the Boy Scouts, in favor of the homosexual community at that time. So that was just one example. So we're losing money, we're losing members, and it kind of gets ugly. You keep going next. So advance up here to 2013, and this drip keeps continuing. And we had a gentleman who charged the whole organization named Bob Mazuka. Bob Mazuka put together this crack team of scout professionals to look into the gay issue. And the whole thing was a sham. He brought all like-minded people together, and he wanted he wanted some teeth to his belief that the Boy Scouts should not allow homosexuals. And this would have been 2012. Mazuka knew he was going to retire that year. So he wanted to leave with that strong statement that we will not allow homosexuals in. And he knew that his very obvious heir apparent had different views. So he put his heir apparent on this committee as well, knowing he'd be the only one who had this other view. So it was all this crazy, silly political stuff that Mazuka was playing. so that he could go out and be able to say that he kept the integrity of the program together. So he retired, the new guy came in, and he decided that the band needed to go. And it met with a lot of hostility within the organization. He wanted it to, there was gonna be a national executive committee meeting where he wanted them to vote to lift the ban on homosexuals. And it caused such an uproar within the organization that the executive committee refused to vote. He had the votes he needed, but suddenly it's like people were getting death threats. It was a crazy time, and so they said, we're not gonna vote on this. We wanna wait and let the full board of directors vote, which was gonna happen 6 months later. So we as professionals went through 6 months of hell, because we had to deal with nasty phone calls, we had to deal with people pulling their donations, and we have goals on all this stuff. You know, we had to keep growing the organization and growing our dollars and that, and you know, with this going on in the background, and that was the worst 6 months of my professional career. And we would keep holding these town hall type meetings where people could come and express their concerns, and I was the guy who was in charge of all the rural parts of the Houston area. And so, you know, we're going out to small town Texas and letting people tell what they thought, and very few of them saw it the way that I did. And by this time in my life, I had already stopped going to church, was pretty much an atheist, and very friendly to the gay movement, and just, I had to listen to these people, and it was just disgusting. It was so hard to keep the Boy Scout face on, even though this is where the organization was going, I needed to support it. I couldn't be outwardly saying these things. I had to kind of keep my opinions to myself, and we got through it. The board did get together, they did vote down, they voted to drop the ban on gay youth. So if you were a member of the Boy Scouts of America as a child, when it was up to your 18th birthday, and you were gay, you could be a member. But they didn't drop the ban on gay adults. See a problem that might happen there? Kids become adults. So these kids could go all the way through and get their Eagle Scout, but on their 18th birthday, they're no longer allowed to be a member. That lasted about 2 years. And then, you know, no one knew, everyone knew it wasn't going to hold on. There's just no way. And when that first batch of people that had applied to started saying, really, you're kicking me out now, and made news stories, they could go to the next one there. So yeah, 2015, this is when the gay leaders were allowed to be in. So all this time, I'm personally in Wichita Falls, Texas, where everybody's hating this stuff. And I'm getting daily calls about how terrible it is that the Boy Scouts are losing their moral fabric, they're losing their compass, they're on. People were writing editorials in the local newspaper about all this, and they're asking me for quotes. And it was awful. It was really bad. And my old board of directors was on the other side of the issue than I was, so I couldn't tell them that. I had to actually write a letter on their behalf to the national office expressing their concerns. They originally wanted to tell the national office, we are disassociating from you. We are not a part of you anymore. And I told them, that's not really going to fly. But I floated it to someone at national who came back and said, okay, surrender all of your badges, surrender all of your uniforms. Anything that has the Boy Scout logo belongs to us. You are now no longer an issue. We will be establishing a new Boy Scout council. And so they backed away from that. So they instead just wanted a strongly worded letter that's floating somewhere in our file cabinet that I wrote on behalf of my board of directors. So this is what was going on in my life when I came and visited you guys and said, I've got to find something that's more me. I did find a local group over there after I got back from my trip to Texas, and you know, that was pretty much my days were numbered at that point. I knew I wasn't going to be around a whole lot longer, and found that I love education, of course, so that's nice. Go to the next one. 2017, with zero fanfare, they allowed transgender thing. And that was one of these, they signed it in the middle of the night when nobody was looking, hoping it would not get a lot of traction. And the next year, 2018, was when you saw that first quote. So they allow the gay youth, they allow the gay adults, they allow the trans in, and they figured, we gotta do something to keep our base around. So they doubled down on the Boy Scouts. And they,
Religion.
I'm sorry, yes, they doubled down on religion, they doubled down on atheists. And they actually put in some new requirements along these lines. For those of you who are familiar with the Boy Scout process, to advance ranks, you have to go through a board of review. And now, every board of review, you have to tell the committee what you did to do your duty to God since your last board of review. And that had never been there before. Really, an atheist could get through the whole program and never have to say anything about God if you were in the right troop, and that wasn't a big deal. Now you're required to do that. And again, that's all about shoring up the base, making sure that their people are know that we're holding on to this one last band that is in place. The next. Well, there we go. So why does all this happen? Friends of Scouting is code for fundraising. This is what, whenever you hear Friends of Scouting, they want you to give them money. And this is something from Raleigh, North Carolina that I found online. But it's very typical of the type of events that I was having to put on a regular basis to bring in money to help pay my own salary and maintain the organization. None of this money actually went to boards or even to local troops. It was all to maintain the office and the camps, and about 70% of it went to salaries. So this was a very important thing to me. And anything jump out at you about that picture?
Old white men?
Over 50.
Bunch of older white guys. These people here are still tied to the World War II generation, otherwise known as the silent generation. They are very philanthropic. They are very good at getting the community to give money. And again, I don't know any of these people here. I just thought the picture was good. But you'll notice over here, the co-chairs are this guy here who looks like he's in his 40s. But he's co-chairing it with somebody else because he probably doesn't have a thump in the community to raise the money. And this guy is probably an old-time guy that everybody in the community loves and would be willing to come out for. So he hosts these, was this a breakfast? Yeah, I've hosted 1,000 breakfasts. And to get people to come out and get some great Eagle Scout kid to come up and talk about how Boy Scout changed his life, and you get people to open their checkbooks and give you money, and the whole thing is about being seen in the right environment, getting money so other people can see you do it, and this is how a lot of fundraising gets done. And so this generation is important. This is the generation of people that have the kids, the millennials. And their values are very different than the values of that silent generation. You go to the next one. So if you compare them, favor sex marriage. 31% of the silent generation is okay with same-sex marriage. So 69% have an issue with it. 75% millennials. And the next one. 33% support transgender. I think those numbers are high. I got that from Pew Research. 66% of millennials. That seems kind of low to me. And then religiously unaffiliated, only 5% of the silent generation are religiously unaffiliated, compared to 35%. That doesn't mean they're atheists. That just means they don't identify with a church. These numbers are a couple of years old. I think the millennial numbers are higher now. We're seeing a very big upward trend towards being religiously unaffiliated. So these are the people who bring in the money. These are the people who bring in the kids. And I I was stuck right here in the middle, trying to keep both those groups happy. Now, I've been talking about my dealing with the religious people, but I had to deal with millennials too, who were mad because they didn't like the way we were going. I had to go to a little town in North Texas and have a Boy Scout troop yell at me because we were allowing homosexuals in. And as I was leaving, a lady kind of pissed me into the room, and it was a group of Cub Scout leaders. And Cub Scouts are the younger group. And she pulled me into the room, and they were having a little secret meeting saying, they don't speak for us. We want to keep going. We want this pact to keep going here. So please help us do that. But we can't talk it out loud because we don't need these people mad at us. So in the same little town, and they shut that troop down. The troop had like 80 boys in it. They shut it down. But the pact kept going. And because of different generations. And I eventually find out that troop ever got started because by now those Cub Scouts are Boy Scouts, or Boy Scout age, and they got it going again. But that was a very common occurrence at that time. Go next. So what you can do if you're interested in being involved in this at all, and you certainly need to be, but the lifeline of Boy Scouts are the schools. The Boy Scouts have probably an illegal relationship with most of the public schools in the area. Illegal is probably a stronger word. Probably unconstitutional. Churches can't go into a school and recruit people, and nor should they. But the Boy Scouts can. I can't even count all the hours I spent going from classroom to classroom, telling boys that if you join our organization, you can light fires, and you can high ropes, and you can sleep outdoors. And I would sell them all this cool boy-oriented stuff, and they would all get excited. And just to be a bit of a jerk, and I would also tell them girls aren't allowed to join, so the boys all thought that was great. And so they would come out, and we would do this every year. We go to all the schools and recruit the schools that would let us. Over the years, schools got a little antsy of this, and some school districts kicked us out. And now that I work for a school, I kind of get it, because schools don't like controversy. And if there's an upset parent or an upset teacher, they will listen to that. And so if you've got a kid who's in a school that gets recruited by the Boy Scouts, phone call will do a lot of good. Phone call will change things there. Can you go to the next one? This is my last slide. So beascout.org is where you can go if you want to sign your kid up for Scouts. And you can also find out what troops are in your area, and with a little bit of digging, you can find out what their relationship is with the local elementary schools. And I'm not recommending anyone do anything here. In fact, some of you may be Scout leaders or have kids in Scouts. And I'd like to help you too if you want to help navigate your way through the organization, because you're going to have to figure out how to do that, because at some point, if your child is a non-believer, that's going to be a problem. But there's value in the organization. I don't want to say that there's not. And if it's something that has value to you, then you need to be careful with what you say to who. And you can have a quality experience there, but there are alternatives. Don has had a long-standing relationship with Camp Quest. And I highly recommend that if you've got children of that age. And there's another organization called Navigators. They have one in the area that meets in McKinney, and they try to do a lot of scouting type things, but they are for non-believing families. So those are two things that I highly recommend. That's the end of my formal presentation. Does anybody have any questions? Yes, sir.
Thank you for your speech. It's really enjoyable.
Yeah, thank you. And now your question.
My question is, what about the girls? How did they get in?
Oh, fantastic question. They got in because the Boy Scouts are draining members like you wouldn't believe. They are dying an ugly death. These small councils like Wichita Falls. In 1980, Wichita Falls had 8,000 scouts. When I left in 2015, they had 800. And Wichita Falls is a town of only 100,000 people, so it's constant. It's actually a good measure. of how scouting is doing because it never changes. It's kind of hard to measure if a town is growing like you. Well, of course, the scouts are going to go with it, but they are leading scouts like you wouldn't believe, and they're trying to figure out how to deal with that. And so this is a membership grant. They're doing what they can. The Girl Scouts are livid with them for it, and are actually taking them to court over it because of the way that they handled it. And there used to be a good relationship. The Boy Scouts and the Girl Scouts are unrelated. They're completely different organizations. Started 20 years apart. So there have been times where a merger was talked about, and they never did that. And so the Girl Scouts said, we've talked to you about merging. And so they were just shocked that they decided not to do that, and they're just. But from what I've heard from my people I still know on the inside, it was a one-year blip that helped them, and now they're back on the downward trend again.
Was there any clear reason or principle or reasoning for having girls? I mean, is it just to be shrink it and paint it?
The Boy Scouts mask everything in principles. So if you go and read their literature on it, they'll say this was not about membership. This was about we live in an ever-changing world where boys and girls have to work together. So we develop a program that helps them integrate that. Bullshit. It's all membership. Yes, sir.
I was noticing when you were going over the charts that when you look at the variation that came about from the conflicts that you were talking about, it was only for Cub Scouts. The Boy Scout membership was almost flat until the very end. Can you say anything about that?
Yes, just because the Boy Scout, by the time you were a Boy Scout, almost all Boy Scouts were Cub Scouts. Very few joined at that age. They all joined when they were 6, 7 years old. By the time they get into Boy Scouts, they're kind of bought in. And it's the better program. It's a lot more fun. They get to actually do a lot more outdoor things. And so yeah, their numbers, they were on the decline, but yeah, it was a much less steady decline. And the Boy Scouts did some things. When I first started in '89, they were going through a transition. They were realizing they were losing a lot of kids because they allowed hazing in Boy Scouts up until the 1980s. So when you went from the pack to the troop, they'd send you through the spanking machine and do some pretty horrible stuff to these kids. And they ended that, and I think that helped. Then they kind of took the approach of we need to celebrate that they're coming into our troop, because our troop's going to die without them. They got a lot better about that kind of thing.
Well, I guess that kind of makes sense because the Cub Scout curve effectively represents a curve of new members.
Yes. Yes, sir.
I was going to ask you to say more about the spanking machine because I've never heard about that, but it definitely convinces me that I am skeptical of your whole presentation.
Okay.
I think you either made it up or you got it from the Simpsons. Pardon?
Why do you think that?
I'm only sensational. But it does. From the Simpsons.
Well, so a good example of the hazing is, was anybody here in Scout remember the Order of the Arrow? You were, okay. So were you tapped out in the Order of the Arrow?
No, I hung in there and made it through.
No. When they selected you, how did they select you? Did they do the whole tap out thing where they hit you really hard and knock you over? Yeah, they did. They probably did. Yeah, they would do this thing where to join this special fraternal part of the Boy Scouts that you had to be elected into, which also was the part of the organization where the most abuses occurred.
Yeah, it was pretty scary.
Maybe they hit you so hard you don't remember.
But they would do that. They'd line these boys up, and they would come by, and somebody dressed as an Indian chief would stand in front of you and read from a scroll, and then they would pop you as hard as they could on your shoulder. And there were 2 people standing behind to catch you. But if you're standing next to the person and you have to face it, you didn't know that. You thought they were knocking you into a ditch. And it was kind of a scary thing, and that was all part of the atmosphere. And when I came in, they were phasing that kind of stuff out, and people were mad. Also, when I came in '89, they had just lifted the ban on female scoutmasters. That happened in '88, and we had people quit over that. A quick story on that is there was a little town that I worked with who had a female scoutmaster in called Burton, Texas, and she one day we had a meeting of all the scoutmasters in town, and there was an old fogey standing by, just glaring at her the whole time, thinking it was horrible that she was there. Of course, she already felt self-conscious enough. And when there was a break in the meeting, he walked up to her and said, "I just want you to know, I don't think women should be scoutmasters." And she said, "You know what? I don't think women should be scoutmasters either, but none of the men in this town will step up, and I'm going to have Boy Scouts for my son." And to his credit, he came out for 2 years every Monday night and helped her run her troop. So, yeah, it's amazing how a lot of these things happen. Yes, Don?
I have heard that there was a pretty strong relationship between the Boy Scouts and the Mormons, especially in Utah. Maybe a financial relationship, can you talk about that a little bit?
So in 1990 or 91, I forget which, the Boy Scout, the Mormon Church decided to make the Boy Scouts of America its official youth program. That meant every boy in the church had to be a member of the troop, of a troop. I couldn't have been more excited. That was amazing news for professionals because it was a guaranteed source of new members. And I would often have to go into these Mormon churches and sit down with the bishop and look at his rosters and say, "This kid's not signed up, that kid's not signed up." And then he would have to go and get them signed up. And they didn't want to do this stuff. They're trying to run a church. But this was the law of the church. So I had to go and enforce these rules. I remember one time going into a church in Brenham, Texas, and the bishop said, "Yeah, we don't have any boys here." And a whole gaggle of boys kept running by as he said that. And I go, "Are those visitors?" "Well, they're not really the right age." I said, "I'm pretty sure they are." I kind of forced him into organizing a troop because church law said that it had to be the case. And that was the case up until they
And the
recently
church
pulled
paid
up.
for it, right? Paid their dues.
The national Utah paid for their dues. So yeah, it was a sweet little deal to do that.
But now they've disassociated. They're starting their own scouting-like organization, and they're
Yeah.
separating from the Boy Scouts.
Would they have official Boy Scout long johns, or would they?
You'd be amazed at what official Boy Scout drives the price of something to. Yeah, if you put the Boy Scout logo on it, it doubles the price on everything. Yes, ma'am.
Well, they had somewhat of a scandal about the molestations and
Yes.
so forth with it, so can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Back in, I mentioned that the homosexual ban was put in place in '78 because they thought it would fix this situation that they thought was just a little thing. They had no idea what was about to hit them. And to their credit, after that whole period where people were turning in all their friends for being gay, they realized that was not a good thing. They kind of adopted a don't ask, don't tell mentality of we're not gonna pursue somebody just because someone said they were gay. We need to have some evidence that they're actually gay. But then they did something that was very smart. They got a bunch of child psychologists together and a bunch of experts in the field of child molestation and realized this isn't a gay issue. This is a pedophile issue. And when I went to my first national training in 1989, I asked, why do we ban homosexuals? Is it because they're a danger to kids? In 1989, I thought they were. And they said, no, it has nothing to do with that. There's no evidence of that at all. Just the homosexual lifestyle doesn't fit our values. Which I found an acceptable answer in 1989. And then I realized, well, what's a homosexual value? And what a homosexual lifestyle, anyway. I know my best friend is part of a homosexual marriage, and the most boring people I know, so they don't have a lifestyle that I know of, other than to live their life. But so the Boy Scouts figured out fairly early on that it wasn't homosexuals that were causing the problem. And they put these people together and they came up with a program called Youth Protection Training, Youth Protection Guidelines. And they came up with a whole series of rules on how you could have, how a Boy Scout troop should run. And the cornerstone of it was the rule of two, which you were never allowed to have just one adult with youth. There always had to be 2 adults present. Even if there's only 1 youth, there had to be 2 adults present. And they were pretty dogmatic about it. You wouldn't get kicked out of the Boy Scouts and be seen alone with the scout, and you'd be gone. And it cut down the cases of sexual abuse dramatically. The other thing that cut it out is the people who were abusing the kids realized that the Boy Scouts was no longer using prayer. And that's what this really is. You know, these pedophiles, it's not that they love scouting or anything like that. They're looking for avenues to get to kids. The 2 best avenues for the longest time were the Catholic Church through the clergy. And yes. And the Boy Scout thing was so successful that just about every church with kids in it now has a version of that training modified from what the Boy Scouts created back in the late 80s. You know, if you ever want to volunteer at church, you've got to go through a youth protection type training. Yes, sir.
You referred to some of the boring things that Boy Scouts do, like lighting campfires,
Yeah.
hiking. I wonder, did you always feel that way? And if so, why did you decide to pursue this as a career?
I decided to pursue it as a career because they offered me a job. I actually wanted to get into youth protection, and I wanted to work for Child Protective Services when I got out of college. And my advisor at college said, you know, before you do that, the Boy Scouts are coming. Go interview with them. You got a good personality for what they do. So I went and interviewed with them, and they offered me a job, and Child Protective Services never did. I never was a scout, which made me a bit of an anomaly in the organization because most professionals had grown up in the organization, and I didn't. So I never fully bought in to the whole thing. I liked it. It was fun. I enjoyed, you know, I got to go camping with them. I got to learn a lot of these things. And I make that joke because a lot of people get the misconception that if you go to a Boy Scout meeting, you're going to get told that homosexuality is bad. And you're going to be taught all these hateful things. And the reality is, I only had to deal with that once in my whole career. And we kicked him out. A guy who preached about homosexuality to his troop. And the Boy Scouts don't want any of that. The Boy Scouts want all this stuff pushed aside. They want to focus on tie knots, light fires, and write us a check. That's what they care about. And they, you know, all these other issues they didn't want to get into. They just stepped into the landmine when they put the gay ban in. And I didn't really kind of develop this. And then when the evangelicals got a hold of it, they couldn't let go. Because suddenly there's this great source of revenue. And you know, so they were, once the homosexuality became an issue, they started dropping, you know, denominations right and left, but it was only like 1 a year, and they knew if they ever lifted the ban that they would lose all that evangelical support at once.
So, what is your prediction for the future of the Boy Scouts? Will they eventually merge with the Girl Scouts?
No.
What do you think is going to happen?
They'll die.
They'll die?
Yeah, it doesn't have so much to do with a lot of these issues. It also has to do with the fact that Xbox is a much bigger problem for the Boy Scouts than anything else. Kids don't need to leave their house to be entertained anymore, and we live in a more virtual world. And in a way, that's sad. I mean, that was a value that the Boy Scouts brought to the world. It did get kids outside, and it did give kids an appreciation for the outdoors. And so that's just not as valued as it once was. And you know, I find myself, I don't get out here as much as I'd like to, because now I have all kinds of allergies, so it's hard to go camping and that kind of thing. But my opinion is that the organization will eventually just close its doors. It's incredibly top-heavy. The Boy Scout National Headquarters is not very far from here in Las Colinas. And it's this huge building that employs hundreds of people that have six-figure salaries. Who's going to be paying for that? You know, they're losing support right and left. And I just heard they're having big layoffs at their national office. And local councils are, Utah, not surprisingly, is going to lay off 75% of their staff because all these Mormons have just now walked away. So they've got a lot of bad days in front of them. Yes, sir.
Now, the Boy Scouts, how it's set up, is there a lot of volunteers?
It's 99% volunteers.
That's the deal. A lot of them not getting paid.
Yes, and I meant to mention that in here. I was a professional in a typical situation is a professional would serve about 1,500 scouts And with them would come about 300 to 500 volunteers. They ran the program. I never ran a troop meeting in my life. I just did the back, I just raised the money, I coordinated the popcorn sale, I did the administrative stuff that volunteers don't particularly want to do. And I was very good at milking volunteers.
Do they have rigorous training for those volunteers?
Oh, yes.
The screening and all this?
Oh, yeah. It is very difficult to become a Boy Scout volunteer. And
They kind of set the standard with this youth protection stuff. They take it very seriously because they have such a bad reputation.
well, but also just training of how to be a volunteer. They would do these things.
So the organization's profiting from the volunteers?
Yes.
Absolutely.
That's how it works.
I made my living off of the hard work of good mothers and fathers of scouts out there. And actually I had some guilt about that for a long time, thinking, I can do nothing and the organization will still grow. Yes, sir.
Do you think that the country becoming increasingly more urban actually will have an effect on scouting membership? Or does that just simply make the availability and an opportunity to go into the wilderness and do things there more novel?
Well, scouting actually started out as an urban organization. It was created because Lord Baden-Powell was a military leader in the Boer Wars, and he realized many of his soldiers that came from the bigger cities were horrible at dealing with outdoor living. They just never had done it before. And so after that was over, he decided, his avocation was, I want to train kids to learn how to live outdoors. And he aimed at those kids. So New York, Houston, bigger cities was where they were trying to really get scouting to, that's where it was born. It was born in small towns. So they can take these kids out into the wilderness, put them in tents away from their moms and dads, and no bad's gonna happen there, right? That was his goal.
I have two questions, and if anybody else doesn't have burning questions, we can continue at Jason's. First question, what is the deal with the Boy Scouts getting money from United Way? Even though they're got this ban on atheism, so it's kind of quasi-religious. Do they have the same problem with the United Way that they do with the public schools?
United Way is not a government entity, it's a private entity just like the Boy Scouts
But
are.
it's supposed to be non-religious, that's how they sell their.
There's other religious organizations in there as well.
They give money to Catholic charities, they give money to.
And Salvation Army.
Overtly religious organizations.
The United Way was that was a nightmare relationship I had to maintain for very different reasons than the stuff we're talking about here, because that was a volunteer committee of community leaders who come together and decide who got what money. And if you had a kid, you had an adult who got on that committee who had a bad experience as a Boy Scout, they held him down and peed on his head or something at a camp out, suddenly we lose our money. And I hated our relationship with the United Way. And the United Way was started as this organization that was supposed to be a way that the organization like the Boy Scouts didn't have to fundraise anymore. All of it would come into the United Way and they would divvy it out to the organization. Well, it never worked out that way. We still had to fundraise and go chase the United Way dollars and go out and volunteer for the United Way. I had to go give United Way presentations. I had to go to the UPS for a long time, 5 in the morning, and do a presentation for their employees so they could do the little thing. But what made the United Way different was they could actually attach themselves to your paycheck. And so you could give money without actually having to write a check. And that had some value, so it was a different avenue to get some money in. But,
Well, a lot of places it's coerced. I worked at a place
Yeah.
where they had 100% participation.
I
can imagine how they achieved that. You would just talk to a higher person.
I got an email on Friday from the school district that we're only at 92% of people because they want 100% participation. So I don't know what feather they get in their cap for getting that. Somebody does in the administration.
They do that in corporations too, because if you're working for Lockheed or whatever, they expected everybody to contribute so much to the United Way. There's something.
Yes.
Police departments.
My second question
Yes,
is,
sir.
the organization that Ernest Thompson Seton started, one of the founders of the Boy Scouts in America, was the Woodcraft Indians.
Yes.
And that went on to become the Woodcraft Rangers, which is still in existence. have anything to
Not
say
sure.
about?
Seton was in the Boy Scouts, so that was all. When the Boy Scouts started, there was a number of organizations that tried to copycat it. And
Well, Seton's organization came before the Boy Scouts.
it did. So what caused the Boy Scouts to really take off was there was a gentleman in America. There was the Boy Scouts started in England in 1907. There was a gentleman named Boyd who went over to England for some sort of business trip, got lost in the fog, and couldn't figure out where he was going, and a young boy came and helped him find his destination. And when he tried to give the boy money, the boy said, "No, I can't take your money, I'm a scout." And this impressed Boyd to no end, so he found out about it, met Baden Powell, and decided he was going to bring this back to America. Boyd was a gazillionaire, and so he had a bunch of money. And other organizations like the Boy Scouts were kind of springing up at the same time, but he had the dough to get this thing really going. And he started, I believe, in Chicago, but he wanted it to be nationwide very quickly. And he actually hired the first scout executive, who was a man named West, who was in a wheelchair. So you think, wow, well, a lot of this progressive thinking stuff was going on. They were very open to different races and the religion thing, so it seemed to be this open-minded organization. Well, Boyd and West hated each other. This is a little secret you don't really find out when you read the books about it. They only worked together for about a year, and then Boyd said he didn't like it anymore, but it was strong enough that he couldn't kill it, so he went and started a program called the Lone Scouts. And somewhere in that whole process, Boyd became a raging racist. And the Lone Scouts was an organization for white boys. Said it in the publication. And the Boy Scouts was not that. The Boy Scouts included everybody. And there was a big 20-year rift between those two organizations. And before he died, Boyd came back. And the Lone Scouts joined in with the Boy Scouts. And there's still officially a program within the Boy Scouts, a subset called Lone Scouts. And it's for, now it's for any kid who lives too far away to join a troop, so he can do the program by himself. People get Eagle Scout doing that. I don't know Seton's story as well, but oh yeah, when you join the Boy Scouts, there's statues to Seton everywhere. So they all kind of came together. Buffalo Soldiers was another one that came into that. And then about 20 years ago, there was another kind of a split off where a lot of denominations decided the Boy Scouts wasn't religious enough. So they started Awanas and Royal Rangers and some of these other things that are basically the Boy Scouts, except in the Royal Rangers you've got to be a Southern Baptist, and they put that kind of stuff in. Those organizations never really grabbed hold. And what keeps the Boy Scouts so strong is that Eagle Scout rank. It has such prominence and it's such such a cloud. Did you find that it helped you in your career?
Yeah, I put it on recipes.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, you should.
People respect it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a big deal, and it's like the most impressive thing you can do before your 18th birthday is become an Eagle Scout. It takes a lot of work and a lot of dedicated parents. Most of the time, you'll find out that the reason a kid got Eagle is because his parents held up their driver's license till they got Eagle. Or
Yeah.
they weren't allowed to date until they got their Eagle and things like that. But it pays huge dividends, and there's just nothing else like that out there. The Girl Scouts have the Gold Award, but it just isn't. Nobody. Whenever everybody puts a Gold Award on their resume, they put equivalent to Eagle Scouts. So people know what it means. All right.
Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
you're welcome. Thank you guys.
You can touch on the whole cultural appropriation thing, because they do, that's another thing the scouts are kind of under the
Yeah. So.
microscope about, because they have a lot of Indian or Native American
Which they
terminology.
That was Seton's thing, is that his claim to fame was bringing in these Indian traditions.
That's where Seton came in. Seton was
Yeah.
Order of the Arrow. That's what got incorporated into the Order of the Arrow. And it was just an amalgamation of various Native American tribes, which we, everybody thought was cool, now it's kind of like, it's kind of insulting.
It was made up, and a lot of the
Yeah.
terms were made up, and like even when you get the, what's it called, when you cross the bridge from Cub Scouts and the Boy Scouts and the Arrow of Light or something like
Yes,
that.
yeah.
That has a whole lot of like Native American influences, but it's all contrived, and it's pretty offensive.
So cultural appropriation,
Yeah.
that's the new sin.
Yeah.
This is my wife Karen, as you can tell, we have amazing philosophy.
Okay, now for the most important part of the church service. It's not free, we gotta pay for this room, pay for an ad that goes, Dallas Morning News got rid of its worship services section, so we can't really stick ourselves in there and say, hey, me too. But Fort Worth Star Telegram still has that, so that's kind of interesting. But whether or not it brings anybody in or not, remember that stands for you, your values, for that to show up in the Star Telegram. So please, these rainbow colored boxes in the back of the room, we do depend on your donations, whether it's a penny or $1 billion. Ooh, we do a lot with $1 billion. Negotiable securities and cash, gold coins, well, gold bars too, would be fine. Anything you have, please, the most important thing that you can do to support us is just by showing up. We appreciate you all coming today. How many are new, by the way? Let's say we haven't seen you before. Hope you come again. Hope you can join us at Jason's. Give us some feedback as to what you thought about today too. So remember that the big reason to give us your money is we can be together.